When you are.
Okay, go ahead, Moshe.
Okay, I hear a dog. Okay. Okay, Frank?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, hi.
Ready.
Shalom, I'm Moshe Margolin, one of the co-chairs, along with Freddie Perlmutter of the Adult Education Committee of the Jewish Center in Princeton, New Jersey. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to welcome you to our presentation in the Adult Education Global Series. The series was created to take advantage of virtual learning experiences which can originate anywhere in the world. This semester's presenters are from Hungary, England, Israel, the Netherlands, Germany, and now we just added one who will be talking about the Jews of Uganda to end up the year. Anyway, today's program is on the 21st century Marranos, Polish Jewry. Before I turn the program over to Rabbi Moreau to introduce our guest speaker, I would like to go over some of the ground rules for today's programs. If you have a question for Rabbi Schudrich, please type it in the chat box. The questions will be curated to avoid duplications. We will have a question and answer session at the conclusion of the rabbi's remarks. If you have a burning question that's for the sake of clarification, please write it in the chat box and say urgent or immediate, and we'll try to break in if we can. Please keep all your questions as concise as possible. You will be muted throughout the presentation to avoid inadvertent distractions. Rabbi Moreau, it's all yours.
Welcome, everyone. I'm going to just start us with a bracha that we're La'asok b'tzorchei tzibor, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu, La'asok b'tzorchei tzibor. Our learning today should be dedicated to understanding those in our global Jewish community, and specifically today we are able to be with you in Poland as you have, like we have, great concerns for your neighbors in Ukraine, and probably concern for if you will be welcoming new Jews from that community into yours, and know that they are our community as well. Let me introduce you to Rabbi Schudrich. Rabbi Schudrich was born in New York City in 1955, was educated at day schools in the New York area. He went to SUNY Stony Brook, and graduated with a religious studies major. He became a rabbi at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America in 1980, and then at Yeshiva University in 2000. He also has an MA in Jewish Studies and an MA in History from Columbia, Roar Lions Roar. Rabbi Schudrich served as the rabbi of the Jewish community of Japan from 1983 to 89. So now we know when you left there. As a student in the 70s, Rabbi Schudrich began his travels to Eastern Europe by leading Jewish groups to those countries and meeting with the She'erit, the remnants there. In 1990, Rabbi Schudrich began working for the Ronald S. Lauder Foundation and spent 1992 to 98 residing in Warsaw, Poland, and more about his work at the Lauder Foundation, because that's how I came to know Rabbi Schudrich. In June of 2000, Rabbi Schudrich returned to Poland as the rabbi of Warsaw and Łódź, right? Not Lodz, Łódź. And in December 2004, was appointed chief rabbi of Poland. He's the recipient of many, many awards and medals, and the Polish Presidential Medal of Honor, many, many awards. He's married to Magda, and he has a daughter, Ariana, who lives in New York. I was honored to be able to meet Rabbi Schudrich when I was a kid at Columbia University. A ragtag group of a cappella Jewishly committed kids wanted to come to Poland and wanted to come to Eastern Europe to bring our music. we found out that we were the first group of Jewish kids to be singing in Eastern Europe after the communism had left. And we were met there, and our trip was planned with the help of Rabbi Schudrich, and he was with us every moment of the way. Every moment of the way, hosting us in his home on the floor, took bus rides with us, was there when every single person in the group had gotten sick from eating at one of the restaurants. What he mostly was able to do is introduce 16 friends of mine and me to the world of our ancestors and to the world of the current. Several people in our group in Pismon would continue working with Rabbi Schudrich by coming back to Louder camps in the summers. And those 2 trips that I took with Rabbi Schudrich allowed me to really open up the world of Polish and Eastern Europe, Hungarian, former Czechoslovakian Jewry. He does amazing work. I love following what he does on Facebook and to see him reseed and regrow a Jewish community. It's so exciting to have you here. Also, as one story, which I told people I would tell, the morning my little a cappella group was leaving Poland, I realized I had lost my passport. What we found out was that my passport was stolen. We found that later out by the FBI months and months later, but I was gonna have to stay. I didn't want to stay. Rabbi Schudrich ran around and called his friend, I think the ambassador at the Polish embassy, then took his own złotys, I guess, got me a picture, got me a passport, and got me out and on the plane. So thanks for freeing me. And I still owe you $50.
All right. Fastest passport I ever got. Took me about 50 minutes to get you the passport.
I know, it was amazing. But mostly that it was an amazing trip because I will tell you, my friends in Pismon and I still talk about in our Divrei Torah and in our lives, how when we talk about the Holocaust today, we so often talk about destruction, but the parts that we really need to talk about are what was there before and what is growing now as well. And the Jewish community is growing because of Rabbi Schudrich. And we are particularly interested today in hearing about the growth of the Jewish community that you have enabled and helped. And then also if you could touch a little bit on how you and your community are reacting to the terrible war going on quite near you. Rabbi Schudrich.
Okay,
It's great
thank you
to
so
see you.
much, Rabbi Merrill, or as I used to call you, Andy.
Right.
So I'm probably going to spend more than just a few minutes about the situation in the Ukraine, because that's clearly what's on everyone's mind, including myself. But so first, let me just start about why are there any Jews in Poland today? After everything that happened to Jews before the Shoah, during the Shoah, after the Shoah, why should there be any Jews left in Poland today? September 1st, 1939, World War II begins. At that point, there are 3.5 million Jews in Poland, the heart, the soul of the Ashkenazi world. 5 years later, only 5 years later, 90% of those 3.5 million Jews no longer alive, having been murdered by Germans and their accomplices. That statement is so horrific. Most people don't think how many Polish Jews survived. 10% survived. 10% of 3.5 million is 350,000. 350,000 Polish Jews still alive after the Shoah, more Jews in Poland in 1946 than in the United Kingdom today. Where are they? The vast majority of the survivors leave Poland in the 25 years after World War II. If you want to feel safe saying the statement, I am a Jew, it makes good sense to leave post-Holocaust, Soviet-occupied, communist Poland. And most of the Jews left, but not all the Jews left. And those who stayed basically agreed with those who left. Stay Jewish, leave communist Poland. Stay in communist Poland, leave being Jewish. And what that often meant was not only you didn't practice Judaism, but often you didn't even tell your children and grandchildren. And while a couple of 100,000 survivors left, some tens of thousands stayed, and most of them, the vast majority, gave up their Jewish identity, many times not even telling their children or grandchildren. And the deep, dark secret stays a secret for 50 years, from 1939 to 1989. 1989, communism falls. And at that point, these not so young survivors are confronted with the question, do I feel safe enough today to tell my children, grandchildren, friends, colleagues, neighbors that I'm really Jewish? Since 1989, thousands of Poles, and perhaps at some even tens of thousands of Poles, have discovered that they have Jewish roots. That's the story of Polish Jewry today. And so now I'd like to share with you a few of those stories. So, for example, a young lady comes to me a few years ago and says, Rabbi, I think my mother's mother is Jewish. Okay. Now, I never ask at the beginning for proof. I don't ask for documents. If you think your grandmother or your grandfather or somebody in the family is Jewish, you're welcome. Come to our lectures, come to our Shabbat dinners, come see what Judaism is about. And what I found is that over time, the story comes out, the story is clarified, or sometimes the story is not clarified. In this case, the young lady came to me probably about a year and a half, probably just before COVID, it's a little bit more than 2 years ago. And she says, Rabbi, I'm really into it. She was coming to the lectures and the Friday night dinners and Shabbat morning and this and that, getting really active. She says, I can't find any documents to prove that I'm Jewish. What am I supposed to do? I said, is your grandma still alive? She said, yes, my grandma was born 1946, which from my perspective is not that old. And so I said, can I meet grandma? She says, no, well, I don't know. She comes back a few weeks later, says, grandma's happy to meet you. I said, great. So make an appointment, meet grandma in my office. And after the first couple of moments of greeting, I asked grandma a simple question. Has anyone ever told you that you're Jewish, you have Jewish roots? And she said, no. Okay. Wasn't the answer we were looking for, but she was honest. She told me no. No one ever told her that. She said, but Rabbi, there was some strange things in my background. For example, I remember in the fall, my family would build a booth outside the house. There was flowers there, and we got to play in the booth, and we thought that was a lot of fun. Then I remember in the winter, there was this, some special time when we got this spinning top, which had 4 strange symbols on each side, a strange symbol on each side. We didn't know what it meant, but you would spin it, it would fall down, and then it depends on what symbol it was, you would win or you would lose. And then in the spring, I remember that there was some time that we couldn't eat any bread. Okay. And then she says, every Friday afternoon, they had to take a bath. Okay. Getting ready for Shabbos, but non-Jews also can bathe on Friday. Then she said, Rabbi, every Friday night and Saturday lunch, we had a special family meal. So I asked, well, what about Sunday? You probably also had a family meal for Sunday. I said, no. No special meal on Sunday, Friday night, Saturday lunch. Interesting. I said, well, what did you have for Friday night dinner? And she said, we had chicken soup and challah. Well, chicken soup is a popular dish in Eastern Europe, not only Eastern Europe. And actually, the Poles love eating challah. So it could be a coincidence, but it's getting a little bit more specific. And then she said, and the look in her face as she went back 70, 75 years, she says, and then I remember there was this dish that you had to cook for a long time, and it had meat and bones and beans. And I said, wow, that's interesting. And you had that for Friday night? She says, no, Rabbi, that was Saturday lunch. Now that obviously was cholent. She forgot the potatoes, but okay. And then the last thing she said was, and I remember we'd get up, they would like to sing and get up and dance to a certain melody. So I'm trying to think, maybe it's a Yiddish song, but you dance the Yiddish songs. And I tried to sing often Pripitchik, and if I tried to sing Rosen Kishin Mandlich, and if you heard my voice, you would know I became a rabbi, not a cantor. So She says, no, Rabbi, no, not that song. Not, no, so I'm sorry. So I said, very nice to meet you. She left. She came back 4 minutes later. She says, Rabbi, I remember the melody. Which is how me trying to sing Hava Nagila, which I guess at that point was a new song. And on the one hand, it's interesting to see, how does a rabbi decide we have enough facts to say a person is Jewish? But for me, even more compelling is the fact that this woman was putting together the pieces of the puzzle of her life and realizing that she must be Jewish. Just to fast forward, like 2 years later, in the meantime, the granddaughter met a nice Israeli and they got married a few months ago. So it was a nice, happy story, happy ending. And then we have other kinds of stories. A man came to me, this is already towards the beginning of when I was working in Poland, and said, Rabbi, my mother died in May. Was that in November? And after the funeral, the neighbors came over and told me that it really wasn't my mother, that I was born during the war. And my biological mother gave me away to this woman who I thought was my mother, who risked her life to save me, but never wanted to tell me that I really wasn't hers. And the neighbors kept the secret for over 50 years. But now that my mother, the woman that raised me as my mother, has passed away, the neighbors thought I should know the truth, that really that my biological mother was Jewish. So this is what you call having a bad day in Poland. Not only you discover that the woman you just buried wasn't your mother, but you're also Jewish. And then he said to me, Rabbi, I decided if my biological mother is Jewish, I want to be Jewish. The only problem is I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. Rabbi, tell me what do I have to do as a Jew? And for me, it was almost like his own little private standing at Mount Sinai accepting the Torah. And then he said, I feel bad, Rabbi. I don't even have a Jewish baptism. That's how little he knew about Judaism. Well, as being that I'm from New York, I was tempted to tell him I have good news and bad news. The good news is we don't use water. The bad news is Moshe, get me the knife. But I didn't say that, I had to behave. And he went on to get quite involved in the community. A few years later, he comes to me and says, Rabbi, I just learned I'm not supposed to have a tattoo. I said, you're absolutely right. It says it in the Torah. I didn't realize we were teaching that, but very good. And he says, Rabbi, I have a huge tattoo on my chest. So I said, okay, don't show it to me. He says, Rabbi, what am I supposed to do? So I explained to him that, if you didn't know it was forbidden, then there's no real sin. And he didn't even know he was Jewish at the time. So everything is fine, relax, nothing to fix. Well, being a good Jewish guy, he didn't trust his rabbi. So he had to come up with another answer. So he says, Rabbi, I'm going to start wearing tzitzis, the small tallis underneath the shirt, because I want to compensate. I want to counterbalance the tattoo that I have. And he actually passed away about a year and a half ago now. But before he passed away, thanks to DNA, we're actually able to find part of his family in the United States. So that's another kind of story that we have. And these kinds of stories get repeated in all different kinds of permutations. And I'll just add one more. There was someone that came to see me on Friday, so 2 days ago, told me that his mother was a small child during the war, hidden by Poles to save her. And when his mother turned 18, his Polish mother, the woman that saved him, told him, I want you to know that you're really Jewish. I'm sorry, no, that his mother's adoptive parents told her that she's really Jewish. So this is very many years ago. He's in his 50s. And they said, and then my mother told me when I was 18 that I'm really Jewish. This is like more than 30 years ago. I wasn't quite sure what to do about it. I've been thinking about it, reading about it, but I decided now I wanted to see a rabbi. Now I wanted to take a real step towards Jewish identity. And so it only took him a little bit over 30 years to make that decision, because everyone moves at a different pace. And we are not here to judge anyone, to say, you're supposed to start going to shul 2 weeks after you discover. Everyone's got to do it at their own pace. And sometimes it does take 30 years. And if it takes 30 years, we're still here for you. We still welcome you. We still want you to be part of our community. So then the question is, so what do we have today? In Warsaw, there is the Nozik Synagogue, where we have prayers twice a day. Then we also have a Chabad, which also has prayers. We also have 3 Reform/conservative communities that have prayers on Shabbat and holidays. And so someone asked me, well, how do you feel like there are 5 places to pray in Warsaw now? So I said, listen, I'm a rabbi. I would love it if everybody wanted to pray in my shul. Of course. But that's not natural. And therefore, the fact that we have 5 different places to pray shows a vibrancy, and it shows critical mass. And that's an important thing. And so besides just davening, we also, until COVID, for decades, we always had a Friday dinner, a Shabbat lunch, because the problem is many of these people, when they came to us, they may have had Jews at home, but they didn't have a Jewish home. I hope that's clear what I mean. No one really knew what it meant. So we had to make a Jewish home for them, which was in the Jewish Community Center. And besides that, today we have a kollel, we have a nurse, we have a daycare center. Thanks to the Ronald S. Lauder Foundation, we have now a preschool, a primary school, all the way through a high school. We may be one of the very few communities in the world that actually we finally succeeded in opening our high school during the pandemic, which was, why do it the easy way? Like wait till a pandemic to open a new school, right? So, and we have Hillel opened about 7 years ago. The Hillel, like you have on the US campuses, we now have in Warsaw and Krakow. So just to be fair, my wife is the one who started Hillel and is still the director of Hillel Poland. So it's something I'm very proud of also. But we also have second generation. We have children of the Holocaust, people who are children survivors of the Holocaust. We have Jewish war veterans. That group is getting much smaller because of aging, and these guys served in very interesting armies. A lot of them were partisans. So, and we have kosher restaurants, and we have a mikvah, and we have we've had Israeli dance group. We have choirs. It kind of looks almost like it's a Jewish community. I think it is. And so inevitably someone's going to ask about, so how many Jews are there in Poland today? So I'll answer that question right up front. The number of Jews today in Poland, I could say without a doubt, nobody knows. Because the guy that came to see me 2 days ago, that's known for over 30 years that his mother is Jewish, is he in the number or out of the number? Or is he in the number since Friday? So all I can say is I don't know what the number is, but tomorrow it can be bigger. Just to give you some idea, perspective of how it's growing, about 5-6 years ago, we had 250 family members of the Jewish community of Warsaw. Today we have over 700. the median age has probably gone from about 65 down to 45, because it's mostly almost all younger people joining now. So that shows hope and that shows a vibrancy. As I like to say, in 30 years, we've gone from a stagnating, dying, dysfunctional Jewish community to a vibrant, reemerging, dysfunctional Jewish community. And so I did the presentation a little faster than usual, so I'd be able to tell you now, what are we doing about this situation in the Ukraine? Now, I mean, the first sentence has to be that, that Putin simply is a world-class criminal gangster. There is no justification for what he's doing, but I think that's clear to everyone, certainly by today. So what are we doing in the Jewish community of Poland? People are fleeing now the Ukraine. They're fleeing into Poland, into Hungary, into Moldova, into Romania. They could also actually there's one little part where they get into Slovakia. The Polish border seems to be the most popular, which means right now it takes not hours, but days to get across the border. From the reports that we have, to get to the Polish border, already the traffic stops at 25 kilometers. Let's say roughly 13, 14 miles from the border, already there's a lineup. I just heard from some people who were in their car, they were 2 hours ago, they were 5 miles from the border, and now they're 4 kilometers and 800 meters from the border. They've gone 200 meters, was like roughly 200 yards in 2 hours. That's just the mass of people trying to get out. That's one level of problem, and we can't really help on getting people across the border. But once they get across the border, we can do everything to help them. And so as of Friday, we created a crisis management team from within our small Jewish community, coordinating between the different Jewish communities throughout Poland, the Joint Distribution Committee, the Jewish Agency, including also the Israeli Embassy, Hayas, Hillel, and other smaller Jewish organizations in Poland. It is by far the most unified effort I've ever seen in 30 years of the Jewish community. Basically, everybody working together. We have now succeeded in securing 300 beds in 4 different locations for the refugees. We have food for them. We are working on volunteer doctors, lawyers to deal with the legal issues, psychologists to help them because it's a disaster what they've gone through. We also have people at the border as soon as they come across to be able to help them go to one of the communities where we could then help house them. We really have no idea what's going to happen. So far, only very few people have actually come to us. But we are getting phone calls saying, we've got a bus of 40 people. I spoke to someone about 2 hours ago that said, actually, they had a bus. They were all heading to Poland, but the line is so big that they switched and they're now going to Hungary, which has a much shorter line for some reason, even though it's farther away, but you don't have to wait an hour and a half. A day and a half at the border. But we are ready. As I said, we have the beds, we have the food, we have medical care, and all of this we put together since Friday. In a very small Jewish community, we also, as I said, we have volunteers working now. The Jewish Agency has set up an office at the Warsaw airport for any Ukrainians that come out that want to make Aliyah immediately. But it's a one-person office. She's overwhelmed. So volunteers from the community, especially those who are Russian speakers, are there to help. It's a horrible, horrible time, but there's something that is inspiring when you see a Jewish community pull together. And that's what we've succeeded in doing. And hopefully we'll continue to do that. We're here for as long as they need to be. We have already some ideas of what to do for Purim. And some people have asked us, what about Passover? I said, we'll deal with it. Let's get through the next few days. And so, as I said before, although we're small, we're here and we're doing everything and beyond to help our brothers and sisters coming across from the Ukraine. So, Rabbi Andy.
Yeah, hi. Can I ask a few questions?
Sure.
So, and then we'll open it up to other folks. Also, I put in the chat for everyone the link to give to our local federation, which has a fund where the money is going to the JDC, which will be supplying hopefully funds for refugees, for Jewish refugees. It's hard to say that word, but refugees nonetheless. So here's a couple questions. You can answer them in whatever order you want. This one's about the Ukrainian situation. Are you coordinating with Krakow and with the other communities? That's Aleph. Bet, Lahavdil. Talk a little bit about what anti-Semitism is like now in Poland. Certainly, we have what to talk about in the United States. We don't have a great situation here all the time. And then also, how many conversions are you doing in the community? And what is the communication like between these 5 synagogues? So those are my questions before everyone else gets to ask theirs. And thank you for all the sacred work you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for all the holy work you're doing. Everybody does it in their own place. So remind me again, the first question is yes. So we're coordinating throughout the country. I mean, Warsaw is by far the largest Jewish community, but we're in close contact with Lodz, with Krakow, with Lublin, because these are the places that are closest to the border. The other communities are farther away. And so right now we're really focused on those things that are those communities that are geographically closest to the border. And then the question of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Do you mean in Poland or in the United States?
No, that's what I said. I said, we have what to talk about here. Don't worry. We talk about it a lot, too much, more than I ever thought I would in Poland.
Okay, so till about 5 years ago, it was somewhat, I would say, similar to the United States. It existed. It was basically not socially accepted to say it out loud. It was was a wonderful time. Although everyone imagines how much anti-Semitism there is in Poland, and you could find anti-Semitism in Poland beforehand, it was something that was it was not socially acceptable. About 5 years ago, which is fascinating to me because I don't know why or how, but it's like really Europe and the United States around the same time started with this new situation where the social pressure not to say anti-Semitic things out loud kind of fell by the wayside. And that things, my sense is I don't know if there are more anti-Semites, but the anti-Semites don't feel restrained anymore for saying out loud what they believe. And so today you can hear verbal anti-Semitism, not all the time, but you certainly hear it a lot more than you did in the previous years. What is also important that up until now, and I hope it remains that way, the anti-Semitism has been verbal, not physical against people. We do have from time to time a cemetery that is desecrated, but that tragically is something that happens all over the Western world today. It doesn't make me happy, but it's not something that's unique to Poland. In terms of dealing with the government on the question of anti-Semitism, probably the greatest challenge is that this government is right of center, and they see the people who espouse anti-Semitism as part of their potential electorate, and therefore they're reluctant to condemn them publicly. I believe there are other countries that have that same problem. Without getting into talking about other countries. And so it is very difficult to get them to make strong statements against anti-Semitic acts. They will speak out, the government will speak out against anti-Semitism in the general sense. But saying that what just happened yesterday is wrong as anti-Semitic, they tend not want to do. The exception to that was on November 11th of last year, which is the Polish Independence Day. There was a horrible demonstration in a mid-sized city called Kalisz in southwest Poland, or southwest Poland, where there were really horrific anti-Semitic slogans, and they also burnt what is called the Statute of Kalisz, which is a 13th century document which gave the Jews the right to live in Poland. So in a sense, symbolically burning the right of the Jews to live in Poland. It was exceedingly nasty. Nobody got beat up. No synagogue got desecrated, but it was one of the worst examples of anti-Semitism in Poland in the last several years. And in this case, the Catholic Church came out very strongly condemning it right away. The Polish president took 3 days, but in the end, he did condemn it, it's a shame that he didn't condemn it immediately, but it's important that he did condemn it. And he condemned it again when we the last 15 years, we light the Chanukiah in the presidential palace, and he reiterated his opposition to this anti-Semitism again during the candle lighting. So, you know what? In the end, it's a mixed story. Unfortunately, like a lot of other places, it is, as I said, to sum up now, you can hear more anti-Semitism now than you could hear 5 years or earlier, and that's bad. But it is certainly not worse than any other European or country of the United States.
I don't want to take over all of the questions because I know lots of people have questions, but I do want to say thank you so much for the work that you do. And yeah, I'll have more questions.
You had two more questions.
Yeah, do you do conversions, and how do the Zramim work together? How do the Orthodox and non-Orthodox work together?
Okay. So we do conversions. We do conversions together with the European Beit Din. We also sometimes use Israeli Batei Din, and we have a few a year. What I've discovered over the years is that there's the halachic issue when a person is ready, but then there's also a social issue. If you convert in a small community 10 people at once, you begin to change the dynamics of the community. So therefore, I realized that we ought to do the conversions slowly, at the right pace for each individual, but not to rush it. We're leaving the whole halachic issue to the side, but it makes it much easier. Then the people become assimilated much easier into the community. How do the different streams work together? Actually, I work with all of them. The non-Orthodox basically never work with each other. Sorry.
Terrible. Teach them. Okay, I'm turning this back over.
And listen, it's ironic. I'm the only one that talks to all of them.
Right. And we talk to you. Okay.
Thank you very much for that, Freddie.
I just can add to that if I wanted to fight Jews, I didn't have to leave the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I had enough Jews there to fight with. So I'm not here. I'm here to work with Jews, not to fight with Jews.
Rabbi, I just want to also note that our cantor is on right now, and our cantor, I believe you've met him before. He's a Yiddish performer. So Cantor Jeff Warshauer, who's
Hi, Jeff.
Hey,
Jeff. Hi.
Hi, Rabbi. May I ask a quick question? Would that be okay, Frank?
Yes, I was just about to say we'll introduce you now.
Hello, Rabbi. It's so good to see you, and thank you for gracing our community with your presence. I just have to say, yes, thank you, Rabbi Mero. Rabbi Schudrich and I know each other from Krakow over years. I have one very quick anecdote. One day, Rabbi Schudrich, you might remember, I came to services. I was in Warsaw for an extended period and came to services at the Nozik, and you and I talked, and we talked for about 45 minutes. And I want to commend you on your incredibly Hamish personality, even when under pressure. I finally said to Rabbi Schudrich, I said, Hey, man, like you're the chief rabbi of Poland. Don't you have something you need to do other than chatting with me? So thank you for being here. We have mutual friends, for example, Shimon Makuch, and other young Jews or friends of Jews who are headed to the Ukrainian border to help out. Do you see that sort of thing happening a lot? Young Jews and friends of young Jews who are rushing there to help out, and that's my question. Thanks
Yes,
so
yes.
much.
As I said, we already have several of young volunteers at the border, some with cars that were ferrying people back and forth, refugees as they come across to bring them to where they can stay, back and forth. Yeah, and the numbers are growing. And we're also coordinating because the Israeli embassy already has people in 2 places, and we're going to go there and help them also. So this really has become an unbelievable community effort.
Thank you.
Okay, perhaps there are questions from others.
Frank, you're muted. Frank's gonna coordinate questions, but he's muted. Great.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Freddie, you've been watching these. I've got them ready too. Would you like me to do it, or would you?
I can do it, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you, Rabbi. We have a question from Rosalind Silberman. She writes, the Lubavitch Rebbe said once that Jews should not live in Poland. When she was there, she said she felt the ground was unholy. Why do you think it's important to live there?
I believe it's important to live in Israel. But as a rabbi, I'm here to serve the Jews where they live. The Lubavitch Rebbe did not say Jews should not live in Israel. He was asked the question, there was an idea in 1988, 89 to send like 40 young families back to Poland to help with the community. The Lubavitch Rebbe said, we don't send Jews in large numbers back to Poland, but we should take care of the Jews that were there. That is often a misnomer of what the Lubavitch Rebbe really said.
Actually, I read it. I read it in the Chabad newsletter. I did read a reference to it, so I didn't make
Which
it up.
Chabad newsletter? From
This was years ago. This
Right.
was years ago, but I remembered it, and I remembered it when I was in Poland. So I do know that it's been referenced by Chabad
Oh, yeah.
for a long, long time, and it was in whatever their popular news thing was that they sent. It was on the internet. So I did read it.
That doesn't mean that it's true. But regardless, I mean, first of all, I'm not a Lubavitcher Chassid. I have tremendous respect for the Lubavitcher Rebbe. From what I understand, he didn't say it. I also met the Lubavitcher Rebbe a few times in the very early 90s, and he was very supportive of the work that I was doing and that Ronald Lauder was doing. So I have a completely different understanding. But the question is, the ground is unholy. This ground is filled with Jewish blood, that's for sure, there's no question. But there are Jews that were born here. Many of them didn't even know they were Jewish, who are now in the last 30 years discovering they're Jewish. Don't they have a right to know they're Jewish? Don't they have a right to learn what it means to be Jewish? Don't they have a right, and maybe we even have an obligation, to help them in that journey to rejoin the Jewish people? These people did not decide to be born in Poland, as no one decides where they're born. That's something their parents decide. And so I believe very deeply that these people who did not make the decision to be born here, these people who did not make the decision to discover they were 18 or 32 or older that they're Jewish, that we owe it to them to let them have a chance to reconnect to the Jewish people.
So I wasn't against that, your position. I just wanted to hear what your position was.
Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi. Let's move on a little bit. We didn't mean this to be as interactive as we're being now, because we have other questions too. You have one here from Pamela Zeifman. She asks, to what extent is Holocaust education supported in the public school systems in Poland?
Okay, So what we're talking about is the post-communist period since 1989. Already in the early 90s, they were writing very good curricula, very thorough curricula on the Holocaust. As far as I saw, always the big challenge was and is and will always be teacher training, because teachers teach better that which material that they're familiar with. So if a teacher gets teacher training on the Holocaust, they will teach it more in depth. It's absolutely natural. It's not about the Holocaust. It's about, teachers have to know what they're teaching about. You could teach it in 20 minutes. You could teach it in 3 sessions. And so I've always believed in a big emphasis on teacher training. In the last 5 years, there is no Holocaust denial here. What you do have is not wanting to talk about Polish complicity. The fact there was no Polish government during the war. The Germans conquered Poland, and the government went into exile to England, which actually did speak very openly trying to help Jews. And there was no puppet government, unlike parts of Scandinavia, France, Holland, Belgium, Hungary, Croatia, etc. This was actually annexed into the Third Reich, and therefore there was no Polish government to collaborate or not to collaborate. However, there were individual Poles that did collaborate, and in the last for 25 years there was some awareness and more talking about it, because under the communists nobody talked about it. And in the last 5 years, you now have people who are saying, why do we have to keep talking about Polish complicity? We don't want to talk about that. And even to some extent saying that it's not patriotic to talk about Polish complicity. And that's the big battle now, is not over Holocaust denial or teaching the Holocaust, but Poles to be able to face the fact that they did have some of their fellow countrymen or women who collaborated with the Germans.
We go on to another question. Leslie, you raised this one about an issue related to kosher meat. And Rabbi Schudrich, do you know whether that issue still exists or has it been resolved?
Okay. There were 2 efforts in the last 8-9 years to ban shechita. The first one was about maybe 7-8 years by now, and it was really led by animal rights people. There's a tremendous lack of knowledge in Poland about what shechita, the Jewish religious slaughter, is like. And unfortunately, the animal rights people have really taken over the narrative, and it makes it sound like we're really doing something voodoo terrible to the animals. Now, just for fairness, I'm a vegetarian the last 44 years. Maybe it's 45 already. So that's my response to how not to hurt animals. But that's my personal decision. What had happened 7-8 years ago is that it was a complicated legal process. To make it short, it ended up going to the highest court, which is called the Constitutional Tribunal, at which the Constitutional Tribunal came out with a very clear decision. I believe it was 9-4, saying that religious rights are more important than animal rights, and therefore there's no question that religious slaughter is permitted. It was a case that the Jewish community of Poland took to the High Court, and I was the only person permitted to be a witness. So you can't imagine doing this in Polish, which my Polish is okay, but it's not as fluent as my English, that's clear. And realizing that if I blow something and don't say something the way I really want to say it, they could end up banning shechita in Poland, which could be a domino effect for the rest of Europe. So nothing like feeling pressure. But as we say, Baruch Hashem, it was a resounding victory. About 3-4 years ago, and they tried it again, this time not to ban shechita, but ban the export of shechita. The local community could have done it for their own purposes. I still strongly opposed it because I said that if you want to ban exporting all slaughtered meat, that's fair, okay. But if you just single out religious slaughter, which would be shchita and halal, then you're somehow indicating there's something worse about shchita than the non-kosher way of doing it. And it's just simply not factually true. I was in negotiations with different members of parliament. And then, as often happens in the inefficiency of government, it just got lost along the way and is in somebody's drawer at the bottom and no one's looking at it. So it kind of died along the way, fortunately.
Thank you, Rabbi. Can we go back a little bit to some of the things you were talking about with people not knowing they were Jewish? Questioner asks, what's required for conversion in Poland, and what is the process if they wish to proceed?
Okay. Well, so first of all, if someone comes forward and says, my mother's mother was Jewish, and by the way, I even know what her real name is, and here I have documents, then they're Jewish. There's no conversion. Just because you didn't know your mother or grandmother was Jewish doesn't mean that you need to go through conversion. Now, there are cases, and I've had a handful of cases where people have discovered that their mother's 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 mother was Jewish 4 generations back, at which point it's impossible to find any documents. And so in those cases, in other cases like that, there is something called giur l'chumra, conversion in the situation of doubt. But then there are also people with Jewish roots from their father's side who want to be accepted by the entire Jewish world as Jewish. And they're also just what we call seekers, people who have no Jewish roots that just have decided that Judaism is the right way for them. So our path to conversion is a very classic one. You have to study. While you're studying, you have to start doing it. And when the rabbi and the convert feel that they're ready, then we take them before the Beit Din, the mikvah, and we convert.
Good. Now a question about immigration. You had spoken a little bit about this earlier, but people are asking about anti-Semitism in Poland related to the growth of the Jewish community, and reports that 200,000 Ukrainians are fleeing Ukraine because of the war threats there. Do you know how many of those might be Jews?
Okay, there are already over 100,000 Ukrainians here. We have come in contact with very few of them, maybe a few dozen so far, and there are no real serious statistics. People estimate anywhere from 1 to 5 million people may flee into Poland. So and I know that there are busloads from Lvov, from Kiev, from other places that are waiting. They want to cross into another country, and some of them may come here. So that's what we're getting prepared for.
How about a specific area like Galicia, near the Ukrainian border in the southeast of Poland? Anything special that you think might be related to them?
Well, basically, Lvov is 70 kilometers from the border. So it's very, maybe it's a little bit less even. So it's very easy to get to the border. The problem is, because so many people decided they were going to try to get into Poland, that it's people are now waiting a day, 2 days just to get across the border. So people are starting to go to other border crossings into other countries. So there was a bus leaving from Lviv Jewish community. It was supposed to come here because it's an hour drive to the border. But right now it's a 2-day wait at least. So they're going to the Hungarian border, which is, 4 or 5 hours away, but the wait is much less.
Is there a constant? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so we just have no idea in the end how many Jews will come across. We're ready to help when they come.
Are the Jews in Poland currently concentrated in areas like Warsaw and Krakow?
Okay, well, the largest Jewish community by far is Warsaw. Jews tend to live in larger cities. The next largest communities are Krakow, Wrocław, Łódź, or Łódź. Smaller communities in Legnica, Bielsko-Biała, Katowice, Gdańsk, Poznań, Lublin.
Freddie, have you gone down farther in the list here? That's as far as I can see. There are more.
Freddie, you got to unmute.
I know, I'm trying to unmute.
There you go.
I don't have a list.
Oh,
Okay, I have one, Frank.
Go ahead.
Mindy Langer asked, do they need armed security at their synagogue? Do you need armed security under normal circumstances?
Okay, well, we have never had an attack on a synagogue. And I'm not going to say this second half of that sentence because it's obvious and I don't want to be impolite. But our guards are armed, small arms, and we also work with the police. The great fear here is not from the local anti-Semites, but rather from international terrorism. Also because Poland has a fairly strict gun restrictions. So therefore, it is not so easy to get a gun here as in countries like the United States. So therefore, that becomes, general anti-Semitism, the same level, but in terms of, gun issues, it's much less here.
We have several members in the audience who have ancestors or family members more recently that came from certain areas. Galicia had been mentioned before. It was just brought up again near Tarnopol, now in Western Ukraine. Can you speak to Jewish life in those kinds of communities that were once part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire?
I could really speak about that part that is Poland. I don't feel qualified to speak about Western Ukraine or Hungary. So really, in terms of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, that would be Krakow. In terms of a living Jewish community, it would be Krakow. And we have a wonderful JCC there, extremely dynamic, having all kinds of activities. With the senior club in Hillel and the nursery school. But really everything east of there already is not an area where Jews live today in Poland. It used to be very full, but not today. And then once you get to the border, it's another country, and I'm just not qualified to speak to it.
Frank, I did get one question here about the work in Poland to remember and celebrate 1,000 years of Jewish life in Poland before the Shoah. And she says, for instance, and it's the POLIN, is there a Poland museum, or it could be a typo and it could be the Polish museum. So I'm going to ask you, I don't know.
No, Poland, POLIN, yes. So I'm sorry, what is the question, please?
She wants to know about the work in Poland to remember and celebrate Jews before the Shoah. And is that in the museum there or anywhere else?
Okay, so we have a very significant museum here in Warsaw called the Pauline Museum, POLIN, which is about the 1,000 years of Polish Jewish history. It's three partners: the city of Warsaw, the national government, and private donors. It's perhaps the only museum that has that kind of three-sided partnership, and it's really a wonderful museum. It's very worthwhile seeing. And then in other cities, there are museums in many other cities, some often dedicated Jewish museums. In Krakow, in Chmielnik, in Łęczna, in other small places. And they also, in other places, that part of the city museum will include things about Jews. But we could always be doing it better. We've changed a lot in 30 years, but we certainly could do better.
Rabbi Mero.
I got a few again. I'll send them to you. You can write them down and then answer in your order. Is there a way that you'd like us to have connections with your community, help your community? Aleph, Bet, do you recommend that people go on tours of the community? And how can they be about the history before and what is now, and not only Shoah focused? And then for my own self, this is an active living Jewish community. So tell us a little bit about your shul. Like besides Shabbat, do people come together for classes? Is it a social center for people? Do people kind of hang out together? How does the Jewish community feel? Like, do people hang out together? Do they socialize together? What's the Jewish community like for you and for them?
Okay, so the first question.
First question is, how would we have a connection, our community to your community? And then do you think that it is, I mean, I will always say to children, to parents of children, you know, when they're deciding, do I do the Eastern European trip or do I do Israel? And I'm always like, well, you go to Israel first. That's first and foremost. But do you recommend communities come and take trips?
Okay.
And
So,
yeah.
So let me do, because short-term memory ain't what it used to be. So how to connect? It's always best people to people. For example, I don't know, do you work with PJ Library? We just launched it.
Yeah, we do.
So perhaps we could do something just this off the top of my head, which you could see off the top of my head, there's not too much left. So
Yes.
As my father of blessed memory said, God made only a few perfect heads, the rest he covered in hair. So anyway, I just said something off the top of my head that it could be something meaningful to let's get the parents from PJ Libraries from the two communities to communicate with each other. But I think Rabbi Andy, we could discuss that afterwards.
Great,
you know,
great.
off camera, as we say.
Yeah.
So I think I just off the top of my head, I think that's I somehow have a good feeling about that.
Do you have like, do you feel burdened by all the tours that come to your doorstep? Because I'm sure people are touring Eastern Europe a great deal. Well, maybe not during pandemic, but before. Do you want groups to come?
Okay, so the question is when groups that comes. Okay. My answer to that is everyone has to make their own mind up. But if you do come to Poland, then you should also encounter and meet with the living Jewish community. That coming to Poland, for most people, the most important thing is visiting Auschwitz. And that's absolutely correct. I get it. There's no question about that. But while you're here, also visit the living Jewish community, whether in Warsaw, in Krakow, or in other cities. That's essential. So I don't believe that everyone must visit here, because everyone reacts differently. But if you do come, then make sure you're on a trip that's going to engage with the local Jewish community. And your last question was?
Tell us about the flavor of the Jewish community there in terms of here. I think in Princeton, I'm learning because I'm new here. People really socialize with folks from the shul and go out to meals with them. Do you find that it's communal life as far as not only shul, and then what are things that your shul does?
Okay. So what I would say is that is very much a similar model here. A lot of people from the shul hang out together, whether it be from different age groups. I mean, more of the Hillel people obviously hang out with the Hillel people because they're the same age. But people will go to a Shabbat dinner, and then after the dinner, they'll go do something else together. And what's one of the most lovely things is that we find, like from Hillel, they'll end up trying to find, sharing apartments together. They become apartment mates. And they meet not only at Hillel, but on their own. And the same thing happens from the people that go to one shul, the other shul. And it very much, we have classes, and also the Shabbat dinners, the Shabbat lunches, the meals is also a very social thing where people have a chance to meet. We have people who come only for the meal and not for davening. And I wish everyone would come for the prayers, but if they want to come just for the meal, it's also a good thing. So it's very much around social meetings. We now also, in the last maybe 8 years, we have a wonderful JCC here we work very closely with. That's another place where people like to go and just hang out. Now, of course, this is all pre-pandemic. Pandemic turned everything upside down on its head. Everything went online, and we're still online. We're still not teaching. We do have now, we started with one class or two classes on Shabbat, one Friday night, one Shabbat afternoon. But otherwise, all the other classes we still have online because Poland, Europe is lagging behind the United States, and Eastern Europe is lagging behind Western Europe. So until a week or so ago, the numbers of people getting sick were still rising. So we've been very careful and very cautious. And I, in a strange way, proud to say that as far as we know, of all the people in the community that did get COVID, nobody gave it to someone else in the community, which is really an essential element of breaking the pandemic. Is yes, you don't want anyone to get sick, but if someone does get sick, not to get the next person sick. And that we, at least because, with the mask and the distancing and doing things mostly online, we succeeded in that. I also started at the very beginning of the pandemic, which is now unbelievable. It's 2 years ago. People told me I had to go on Facebook. So I don't. Okay, fine.
You're doing a good job. You're doing a good job on Facebook.
Okay, thank you. So I have to go on Facebook. I got to go on Facebook. Now I ended up with like 5,000 friends. I love it. I have 5,000 friends on Facebook. I know 20 of them. It's a whole new definition of what friend means. But I noticed that on my Facebook, there was something called Live. And I saw one or two other people doing that. And I said, means if I push that button, I could talk and maybe someone's going to listen. So I realized at the beginning of the pandemic, when we were in lockdown, with this, people really were locked in their homes, as in the United States, that I'm going to teach twice a day, 15 minutes each time, 9 o'clock in the morning, 5 p.m. at night, and on different Jewish things. And I'm going to press the button, see if anybody watches. And at the height, when it was real lockdown, and it's all in Polish, I was getting over 200 views a day, which I was pretty happy about. Now it's gone way down. Maybe it's down to 180 people a day, and it's only once a day. But that's pretty good. I get tired of hearing myself talk. I can't imagine how other people feel.
Okay, I've got about it.
It was very nice during the beginning of the pandemic when really people were alone, and it was quite problems of isolation. I mean, physical isolation, but feeling isolated. That people said. But the one person we always kept seeing was our rabbi. He was just popping up on the Facebook all the time, on the Zoom all the time. And one person said, I got worried. I was afraid I was going to open my refrigerator and find your face there too. So that was, I sense that means we were achieving the goal, which was as much Jewish education as making people feel that they're connected and they're remembered.
There are two more questions that exist at the moment. One of them has to do with the March of the Living. Is it still going? Is it something you participate in? Okay, well,
March of the Living is planning this year to come no matter what. I would say, in terms of COVID, I'm not going to make any Putin jokes now. So, but they are planning on coming definitely. They haven't come the last 2 years because of the pandemic. And I work very closely with them. We haven't always agreed about everything, but that doesn't mean we don't work closely together.
Okay, and the last question I have has to do with Poland's repatriation of items, material that was stolen, property, in making the victims of that loss whole again.
Okay.
Do you know anything about that?
Okay. So basically, when it comes to property, there are two kinds of property. One is communal, synagogue, cemetery, mikveh, school, Jewish school, or private, my house, my factory. The Polish government passed a law in 1997, which gave the Jewish community of Poland the right to claim back all communal property. And that has been going way too slowly, but it's been going. Then you have the private property. But private property affects not only Jews, but there were lots of non-Jews who lost property, because here in Poland, people lost property twice. The Jews and a few Poles lost property under the German occupation, and then everybody lost their property. Almost everybody lost their property under the Soviet occupation. So it's a double whammy. So the fact is that the person, but except under the German occupation, it was really a German occupation. The Soviet occupation used a Polish puppet government. And therefore, as far as many of us see, is that this current government, not a communist one at all, is still responsible for the decision made by the Polish communist government, even though it was heavily influenced and controlled by Moscow. So when it comes to private property, the Polish government has never passed any law, which means that affects Jews that have property and affects equally non-Jews. Where it's more difficult for Jews is for, not because they're Jewish, but because the vast majority of Polish Jews are now outside of Poland. And therefore, while there is no law that was passed for private restitution, you can go to court. If you have documents, you say, here are my documents, this, my father owned this, I want to get it back. You can go to court and there's a legal process and you could win or you could lose. That's much easier to do when you're in Poland because you go to your local court and you put in the papers. If you're living in New York or Tel Aviv or sometimes Melbourne, Australia, which is really far away, it's a lot harder. You have to hire a lawyer. You have to find a good lawyer. You're doing everything, from thousands of miles away. So the Polish Jews have a disadvantage, not because of anti-Semitism, but simply because the vast majority live outside of Poland. But it is a moral stain on the Polish government that they've never properly dealt with it.
Rabbi, two brief questions. What do you find, is there anything that you miss about living in a Jewish community with where you could speak your mother tongue or where you could speak Hebrew, either in Israel or America? And then what is the most rewarding part of your work in Poland?
Well, I don't miss too much because the most rewarding thing is having a guy come to you and tell you, oh, I would say to you when I discovered my mother was Jewish, I'm now 52, but now I want to know what it means to be Jewish. That's unbelievable. And it didn't happen once, it didn't happen twice. There's a wedding I'm going to, Bezrat Hashem, on April 10th for a young man. This is already the first new generation where his parents discovered and became active members of the community, where I was at this young man's bris, his bar mitzvah, and April 10th, I'll be at the wedding in Israel, because he's now finished the Technion. He's doing a master's at the he did undergraduate, now he's doing a master's at the Technion. So that's good stuff.
Michael, I'm going to say goodbye. It was very nice seeing you.
It's great seeing you. Please send my best to Stephanie and
Will
to
do.
the kids and to the grandkids, and God willing, sooner than you think, great grandkids.
Well, I hope so. We are hoping, Master Shem.
Amen.
All the best.
Thank you very
to
much, Rabbi. We have a few comments to make at the end here. I'm getting notes here about a terrific presentation and Q&A. Thank you for that. Moshe, do you have some closing remarks?
I sure do. First of all, thank you so much. I really had a marvelous time listening.
Well, first of all, you have to tell me, who's that young person down there?
Well, she came in because Grandma said it's my turn to watch her. She is our baby granddaughter who's visiting from Colorado. And she's listening as well. Anyway, thank you so much. It really was delightful, both in the feeling and the warmth, but also in the information that you shared with us. I also have my good friend Frank Lee, who is our Zoom master and keeps us going. And that's an important part, especially when we're trying to connect Zooms from around the world. I also wanted to remind you, oh, hi, just give me 1 minute, that there are going to be 2 other programs in this series. On March 13th, we're going to talk about the Jewish community of, of Germany. Great. And On May 15th, we're going to give you something really, really unusual. We're going to talk about the Jews of Uganda. So that's how we're going to end up this series. And I want to thank you all for participating in the program. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you
Moshe.
so much.
I'm going to stop recording now.
Thank you. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Schudrich. Love to
Thank
see you
you.
again.
To the rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you someday. Hey, hopefully see you at the time that you don't lose your passport.